The void between stars was never truly silent. Zapkel knew this better than most. His command pod hummed with the soft crystalline resonance of Zapirian biosystems, a sound like distant wind chimes made of living glass. The resplendent clarity, his flagship, drifted through the dead expanse of the Kessix Expanse, its hull shimmering with the faint blue-green pulse of its organic energy cores. The ship was a masterpiece of Zapirian engineering, sleek, angular, and forged from translucent composites that refracted starlight into spectral fractals. To the rest of the galaxy, it was a symbol of their superiority, an unbreakable fortress of intellect and discipline. And yet, here, in the dark, it felt fragile. Zapkel's secondary limbs twitched against his command throne, the fine silver filaments of his neural interface flickering with unease. The expanse was a graveyard. No trade routes, no colonies, no reason for any ship, Zapirian or otherwise, to linger. And yet, the distress signal had been unmistakable. A pulse of raw, unfiltered terror, broadcast on every frequency. "Commander," Kessix murmured from the sensor array, his voice a whisper of vibrating crystal. "The signal originates from a derelict Zapirian design. Life signs minimal." Zapkel's mandibles tightened. The High Synod had assured them this sector was abandoned. "Bring us in," he ordered. The resplendent clarity glided forward, its bioluminescent engines flaring as it adjusted course. As they neared, the derelict took shape, a shattered crescent of once pristine living crystal, its hull split open like a cracked egg. The damage was catastrophic. Something had torn through it with brutal efficiency. Zapkel's secondary heart pulsed faster. "Scanning," Kessix said, his voice thin. "2 life signs. 1 adult, 1 offspring. A hatchling." Zapkel's grip on the throne tightened. Zapirians did not abandon their young, ever. "Prepare a recovery team," he said. "Full quarantine protocols." The boarding drones detached from the resplendent clarity, their crystalline bodies unfolding like predatory insects as they crossed the void. The derelict's interior was a nightmare, twisted spires of broken bio, glass corridors flooded with coagulated nutrient fluids, the air thick with the scent of ruptured energy cores. And there, in the ruin of what had once been a nest chamber, they found them. The mother was curled around her hatchling, her carapace scorched, her tertiary limbs shattered. The hatchling, barely more than a wisp of translucent blue flesh, trembled against her, its bioluminescence flickering like a dying star. Kessix's voice crackled over the comm. "Commander, their injuries are beyond our medical protocols. The mother's neural web is collapsing. The hatchling, it won't survive transit." Zapkel's mandibles locked. No, this was not acceptable. A new signal, not Zapirian, not anything recognizable. It emerged from the dark like a specter, its hull a matte black so deep it seemed to swallow the starlight around it. No luminescence, no crystalline elegance, just angles, hard, brutal, unyielding angles. Zapkel's spines flared in instinctive revulsion. Humans, the chaotic, reckless primates who had clawed their way into the stars with crude fission engines and ballistic weapons. The High Synod had dismissed them as irrelevant, too emotional, too fractured to ever be a threat. The human ship moved with terrifying precision. "Commander," Kessix hissed, "they are hailing us." Zapkel hesitated, then opened the channel. The voice that answered was calm female, utterly unafraid. "Zapirian vessel, this is Commander Helen Langford of the UNS Vanguard. We've intercepted the distress signal. Do you require assistance?" Assistance from humans? Zapkel's secondary heart thrummed with disdain, and yet the hatchling's bioluminescence guttered. He made his decision. "Human vessel," he said, the words bitter on his tongue. "We have wounded. Our medical systems cannot stabilize them." A pause then. "Understood. Stand by." The human ship didn't request permission. It didn't negotiate. A boarding pod launched, streaking toward the derelict with terrifying speed. And in that moment, Zapkel realized something that would haunt him for cycles to come. The humans were not asking. They were taking control. The boarding pod struck the Zapirian vessel's docking collar with a precision that bordered on violence. There was no hesitation, no delicate maneuvering, just a single brutal impact that sent vibrations shuddering through the crystalline superstructure. The humans didn't dock, they claimed. Zapkel's mandibles twitched in reflexive aggression. His ship, once a marvel of bioluminescent engineering, now lay crippled, its energy cores flickering like dying stars. The distress signal had been a last resort, a humiliating admission of weakness. And now, the most unpredictable species in the galaxy had answered. The pod's outer shell hissed open, revealing not the crude armored figures he expected, but a single human. She was tall, clad in a form-fitting exosuit that shimmered with reactive plating. No helmet, no visible weapons, just a face, pale, unreadable, framed by dark hair pulled tight against her skull. Her eyes, a shade of brown so deep it bordered on black, swept over the Zapirian bridge with clinical efficiency. "Commander Langford," she said, her voice calm. "Where are the wounded?" Zapkel hesitated. The human's presence was an intrusion, a violation of the sacred geometry of his ship. Yet the hatchling's bioluminescence dimmed further, its pulse erratic. "Follow," he grated, mandibles clicking in reluctant submission. The human moved with unnatural silence. Her boots should have clanged against the crystalline deck. Instead, she walked as if the ship were hers, her stride measured, her posture betraying neither fear nor aggression. Kessix, the ship's scientist, recoiled as she passed. His antennae trembled, his bioluminescence flickering in distress. "Commander," he whispered in their native tongue. "Their scent, it's wrong, like ozone and iron." Zapkel didn't answer. He had noticed it too. Humans carried the stench of violence in their very pores. The medical bay was a ruin. The ship's organic systems had failed. The bioluminescent membranes that once regulated life support now dark and brittle. The hatchling's mother lay curled around her offspring, her carapace cracked, her energy core pulsing weakly. Langford didn't flinch. She knelt beside them, her movements precise, her hands steady as she unclipped a device from her belt. It unfolded like a living thing, tendrils of silver weaving into the Zapirian's damaged carapace. Zapkel tensed. "What are you?" "Stabilizing her," Langford said. Without looking up, the device pulsed, its energy signature a sickly green against the dying blue of the Zapirian's core. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the hatchling's bioluminescence flared. A sound escaped the mother, something between a chirp and a sob. Her limbs tightened around her child, her core brightening in slow, disbelieving pulses. Kessix made a noise like a dying insect. "Impossible. Our own systems couldn't." Langford stood. "Shall live." Zapkel stared at her. This was not the act of a savage. This was precision. This was mercy, and that terrified him more than any weapon. Because if humans could do this, what else were they capable of? Outside the viewports, the UNS Vanguard loomed, its hull a dark silhouette against the stars. Owning the silence in the Zapirian medical bay was thick enough to choke on. Zapkel's carapace prickled with static, his neural filaments humming in dissonant pulses. He had expected violence. He had prepared for treachery. But this quiet, methodical kindness was something his tactical matrices had never accounted for. The human device still clung to the hatchling's thorax, its tendrils pulsing in time with the child's strengthening bioluminescence. The mother's mandibles trembled as she stroked her offspring's crest, her own core flaring in erratic bursts of disbelief. Kessix was worse. The scientist's antennae twitched violently, his ocular lenses cycling through spectrums as if the data before him were an illusion. "Their technology, it rewrote the cellular degradation," he muttered, his voice a thin, reedy whisper. "No cauterization, no genetic rejection. It just healed." Zapkel's claws flexed, He had seen the aftermath of human wars, the scorched planets, the debris fields littered with shattered hulls. He had studied their history, their relentless, bloody climb from mud and stone to the stars. They were supposed to be brutes, monsters. Yet here they stood, offering salvation without demand. Commander Langford stepped back, her gloved hands smeared with traces of Zapirian hemolymph. She didn't wipe them clean, didn't flinch. Her gaze was steady as she met Zapkel's. "Your ship's core is failing," she said. "Matter. Of fact. Radiation levels are spiking. You have maybe 6 hours before containment breaches." A cold ripple passed through the chamber. Kessix's mandibles clicked. "You scanned us without. You were broadcasting distress harmonics for 3 days," Langford interrupted. "We didn't need to scan you. Your ship is screaming." Zapkel's frill stiffened. She was right. The light of Sixus was dying, its crystalline power core fracturing under the strain of their escape. They had fled their homeworld's fall with half a crew and failing systems, praying the void would claim them before their enemies did. And now these humans knew. His combat instincts flared, weakness exposed, leverage given. But before he could react, a new presence filled the doorway. Captain Daniel Coombs, the human soldier, was a silhouette of armored menace. His visor opaque, his stance coiled like a predator assessing prey. But he didn't raise his weapon. Instead, he tilted his head toward Langford. "Maim." Vanguards prepped for medevac orders. Langford didn't hesitate. "Get a team down here. Full quarantine protocols. We're bringing them aboard." Zapkel's spines flared. "What? You're not surviving re-entry in this state," Langford said, as if discussing the weather. "And we're not leaving you here." Kessix made a sound like a shattered crystal. "You expect us to board your warship, after everything your species has?" "Yes." Langford's voice didn't rise. "It didn't need to. Because if we wanted you dead, you already would be." The truth of it was a blade between the ribs. Zapkel's gaze flicked to the hatchling, now curled safely against its mother's thorax. The humans had saved them, not for leverage, not for interrogation, because it was what they did. And that realization was more terrifying than any ambush outside. The UNS Vanguard's docking clamps engaged with a thunderous groan, its shadow swallowing the Zapirian ship whole. The stars vanished. And for the first time in his life, Zapkel understood what it meant to stand in the shadow of something greater. The human warship swallowed them whole. Zapkel had expected darkness, some crude, brutish cavern of welded steel and exposed conduits, the way lesser species built their vessels. Instead, the docking bay of the UNS Vanguard was a cathedral of light. The walls were smooth, seamless, a matte alloy that drank in the ambient glow of overhead strips. No visible seams, no rivets, just a single unbroken surface, as if the ship had been carved from a single slab of black iron. The air smelled of ozone and something else, something living, like the scent of rain on hot metal or the charge before a storm. And the silence. Zapkel's spines twitched. A warship this size should have been a cacophony. The hum of engines, the chatter of crew, the reverberation of distant machinery. But the Vanguard was quiet, not empty, not dead. A squad of human soldiers stood at attention near the inner airlock. Their armor was matte black, devoid of insignia or ornamentation. Their visors opaque. No weapons were drawn, none were needed. One of them stepped forward, removing his helmet. Captain Daniel Coombs was a study in contradictions. His face was weathered, lined with scars that spoke of old wars. But his eyes were calm, not the forced serenity of a diplomat, but the stillness of a predator who had no need to bare its teeth. "Commander Langford sends her regards," he said, his voice low, measured. "Medical teams are standing by." Zapkel's mandibles flexed. "You expect us to trust your healers?" Coombs didn't react. "I expect you to live." A flicker of movement, Kessix trembling beside him, her bioluminescent markings dim with exhaustion. The hatchling in her arms had gone still. its tiny limbs curled tight against her thorax. Coombs' gaze dropped to it. Something shifted in his expression, something human. Then he turned and gestured toward the corridor. This way. The medical bay was another revelation. Zapkel had seen Zapirian healing chambers, gleaming, sterile their walls, lined with pulsating biocrystalline nodes that hummed with precision. This was nothing like that. The human medbay was a controlled chaos of blinking consoles, hovering drones and translucent screens that flickered with streams of data. The air smelled of antiseptic and something herbal, almost soothing. A team of medics in white and gray uniforms moved with quiet efficiency, their hands steady, their voices low. One of them, a woman with dark skin and silver streaks in her hair, approached Kessix. "Let me see the little one," she said, her voice softer than Zapkel expected. Kessix hesitated, her claws tightening around the hatchling. The medic didn't push, she simply waited. After a moment, Kessix relented. The human's hands were gentle as she examined the hatchling, her fingers tracing the edges of its carapace with a care that bordered on reverence. A scanner hummed, casting a pale blue light over the tiny form. "Minor fractures in the exoskeleton," the medic murmured. "Nothing we can't fix." Zapkel watched, his instincts warring. These were the same creatures who had glassed entire worlds in the Orion Wars, the same species that had turned neutron stars into weapons. The medic pressed a small device against the hatchling's side. A soft hiss and a shimmering gel spread over the cracks in its shell, sealing them instantly. The hatchling stirred, its bioluminescence flickering back to life. Kessix made a sound, something between a gasp and a sob. Zapkel looked away. Later, in a secured chamber that was neither cell nor guest quarters, Coombs placed a small black cube on the table between them. "You will want to see this," he said. Zapkel eyed it. "What is it?" "Your ship's black box." A pause. Then, "Impossible. Our vessels don't use such primitive." "It's not yours," Coombs interrupted. "It's from the ship that attacked you." Zapkel went still. Coombs tapped the cube. A holographic display flickered to life, casting jagged blue shadows across the walls. The recording was grainy, distorted, but unmistakable, a Zapirian warship. His warship, a flash of silver, a shape moving too fast to track. The feed cut to static. When it cleared, the Zapirian vessel was gone. Coombs' voice was quiet. "That wasn't us." Zapkel's blood ran cold, because if the humans hadn't fired the killing shot, the silence in the chamber was thick enough to choke on. Zapkel stared at the static-filled hologram, his crystalline fingers pressing into the table's surface hard enough to leave hairline fractures in the composite. The implications of what he had just seen coiled around his mind like a serpent, cold and unrelenting. If not the humans, then who? The question was a blade twisting in his gut. The galactic consensus had assured them that no other species possessed the capability, or the audacity, to strike a Zapirian vessel. And yet, the evidence pulsed before him in jagged blue fragments, undeniable. Kessix leaned forward, his bioluminescent markings flickering erratically. "This is impossible." His voice was a whisper, but the word carried the weight of a tectonic shift. Coombs didn't answer. Instead, he swiped a hand through the hologram, pulling up another feed, this one clearer, a long-range scan from the human vessel's external sensors. At first, there was nothing but the void, a distortion, a ripple in space, subtle as a breath against glass. And then the silver shape emerged. It was sleek. Too sleek. No visible thrusters, no exhaust trails, no telltale signatures of conventional propulsion. It moved like liquid metal given sentience, gliding through the vacuum with predatory grace. Zapkel's secondary eyelids flicked shut for a fraction of a second. A Zapirian instinct, when confronted with something that should not exist. The ship was unlike anything in the consensus archives. No organic curves, no crystalline latticework, just angles. Razor, sharp, unforgiving angles, and then it fired. The weapon was a lance of pure white light, so bright it seared the feed into momentary blindness. When the image resolved, the Zapirian vessel was already breaking apart, its bioluminescent core flaring once, a dying star before collapsing into debris. Kessix made a sound, something between a gasp and a sob. Zapkel looked away, because he recognized the precision of that strike. The efficiency. This was not warfare. This was hunting. Later, in a secured chamber that was neither cell nor guest quarters, Coombs placed a small black cube on the table between them. "You'll want to see this," he said. Zapkel eyed it. "What is it?" "Your ship's black box." A pause. Then, "Impossible, our vessels don't use such primitive." "It's not yours," Coombs interrupted. "It's from the ship that attacked you." Zapkel went still. Coombs tapped the cube. A holographic display flickered to life, casting jagged blue shadows across the walls. The recording was grainy, distorted, but unmistakable, a Zapirian warship. His warship, a flash of silver, a shape moving too fast to track. The feed cut to static. When it cleared, the Zapirian vessel was gone. Coombs' voice was quiet. "That wasn't us." Zapkel's blood ran cold, because if the humans hadn't fired the killing shot, the answer came not in words, but in the way Commander Langford entered the room moments later, her expression stripped of its earlier neutrality. She didn't sit, she didn't offer explanations, she simply said, "We have a problem." And then the lights flickered. The ship's AI, a smooth, genderless voice, spoke over the intercom. "Unidentified contact. Bearing Fey by Fey, closing fast." Zapkel felt it then, the first true prickle of fear, because he knew the hunters had found them. The lights dimmed again, pulsing like a failing heartbeat. The air in the command center thickened, charged with the scent of ozone and something else, something metallic, like blood left too long in vacuum. Zapkel's crest flared, his crystalline scales refracting the emergency lighting into jagged blue-green shards across the walls. His secondary eyelids flicked shut for a fraction of a second, an instinctive reaction to danger. The humans didn't have that. They stood exposed, their soft, pupil, dilated eyes locked onto the main display as the ship's AI painted the incoming threat in cold, clinical vectors. The sensors struggled to resolve it, as if the thing sliding toward them through the dark wasn't just cloaked, but actively erased itself from reality. Data streams stuttered, flickering in and out of coherence. Thermal scans showed nothing. Gravimetric distortions spiked, then flatlined. Kessix's talons scraped against the console as he leaned forward, his voice a whisper. "That's not possible." Commander Langford didn't flinch. Her hands rested on the back of a chair, fingers curled just shy of a grip, like a predator waiting to pounce. "It's them," she said. No fear, no hesitation. Just fact. Zapkel's mind raced. Them, the ones who had slaughtered his crew. The ones who had left no wreckage, no bodies, just silence. And now they were here. Captain Coombs moved before anyone else could react. His armor servos whined softly as he crossed to a secondary terminal, his fingers flying across the interface. Shields at maximum, point defenses hot, railguns charging. He didn't look up. "We're not running." Langford's lips thinned. "No, we're not." The ship shuddered, not from an impact, from something worse. A soundless, depthless pull, as if space itself had taken a breath and held it. The lights flickered, then steadied into an eerie blood-red glow. The AI's voice crackled, distorted. Gravitational anomaly detected. Collapse imminent. Zapkel's pulse hammered in his throat. He had seen this before, in the last moments of his ship's recording. That same unnatural distortion, that same wrongness. A child's voice, faint, broken, filtered through static, but unmistakably Zapirian. Kessix recoiled. That's our frequency. Our encryption." Langford's head snapped toward the comms array. "Where is that coming from?" The AI responded instantly. Source triangulated. Bearing Fey by Fey. Origin, unidentified vessel. The same coordinates as the void. Zapkel's claws dug into the console. A trap it had to be. The hunters were mocking them, using the voices of the dead to lure them in. His people had done the same in war, replaying captured distress calls to draw enemies into kill zones. But then the voice came again. Not a child. Please. They're coming. They're. A scream. Cut short for a heartbeat. No one moved. Then Langford turned to Coombs. Her voice was quiet. Deadly. Prep the Acheron torpedoes. Zapkel's spines flattened. You can't be serious. That's a civilian signal. No. Langford's eyes burned. It's bait. And we're not taking it. The ship shuddered again. Harder this time, the void was closer now, its edges bleeding into reality like ink in water. The sensors screamed warnings. Power surges, dimensional shear, radiation spikes, all the hallmarks of something that shouldn't exist. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the distress call cut out, replaced by something else, a sound like bones breaking. And then, laughter, human laughter, but not from Langford, not from Coombs, from the void. Coombs' hand hovered over the firing controls. His jaw tightened orders. Commander Langford didn't hesitate. Burn them. The Acheron torpedoes ignited, and the dark answered. The Acheron torpedoes streaked through the void, like twin comets, their propulsion drives carving molten scars through the fabric of space. They were not conventional weapons, not by human standards, and certainly not by the Zapirians. Their payloads were not mere explosives, but something far worse, contained singularities, miniature black holes wrapped in containment fields that would collapse upon impact, swallowing everything in their radius. Zapkel's crystalline claws dug into the command console, his bioluminescent veins pulsing erratically. The tactical display flickered with frantic projections. The torpedoes were closing in. But the void ahead was changing. It rippled, warping like disturbed water, and then, the laughter split. A sound that should have been impossible in the vacuum of space tore through the Indomitable's hull, vibrating the very bones of its crew. It was human, yes, but wrong. Too many voices layered into one, too many screams woven between the mirth. The Zapirians recoiled, their sensory membranes flaring in distress. Quilex's antennae trembled as he processed the data. That's not a signal, he whispered. It's an echo. Then the void moved. The torpedoes vanished, not detonated, not intercepted, gone, as if plucked from existence. Langford's fingers curled into fists. Track them. The sensors howled in protest, their readings nonsensical spatial distortions, temporal echoes, energy signatures that defied physics. The void wasn't just empty space, it was alive. And it was watching. Coombs exhaled sharply. We just fired 2 black holes into nothing, and nothing ate them. Zapkel's spines flattened against his carapace. The humans had built weapons that could unmake stars, and yet, here was something that rendered them meaningless. His people had studied the cosmos for millennia, mapped the quantum tides, mastered bioluminescent energy. But this was beyond comprehension. A flicker on the scanners, a single fragile signal, the distress call. It pulsed weakly, like a dying heartbeat emanating from a derelict vessel half, submerged in the void's encroaching tide. A civilian craft, its crystalline hull cracked and leaking luminous fluid. Zapirian. Zapkel's breath caught. Quilex's voice was hollow. That's impossible. We scanned that sector. There was nothing there. Langford didn't hesitate. Coombs, full scan. Now the data flooded in. Life signs too. Faint, fading, 1 adult, 1 child, and her offspring. Zapkel's mandibles twitched. The Zapirians were a species of logic, of cold equations and crystalline precision, but family that was universal. the void rippled again. Closer this time, the laughter returned. But now it was different. Mocking, hungry. Coombs' jaw tightened. It's hurting us. Langford's eyes never left the screen. It's testing us. Save the survivors, and risk the void's wrath, or leave them, and prove they were no better than the darkness they fought. Zapkel expected hesitation, debate. The humans were reckless, yes, but even they wouldn't charge blindly into the unknown. He was wrong. Langford's voice was steel. Prep the Aurora Lance. Coombs, you're on rescue detail. Coombs didn't question, didn't argue. He simply nodded and moved. Zapkel stared. You can't be serious. That thing out there consumed your most powerful weapons, and you're sending a single soldier? Langford turned to him. Her gaze was fire and ice. You don't send a torpedo to save a life, Zapkel. She tapped her calm. You send a human. And then Coombs was gone, launched through the abyss in a drop, pod that burned like a shooting star straight toward the dying ship, toward the whisper fighting to be heard. The void screamed, and the indomitable answered. The drop pod streaked through the void like a dying ember spat from a forge, its heat shielding glowing molten red as it punched through the debris field. Inside, Captain Daniel Coombs braced against the shuddering impacts, his fingers tightening around the grip of his pulse rifle. The pod's internal display flickered, a fractured feed of the alien wreckage ahead, its crystalline hull cracked open like an eggshell, blue-green energy bleeding into the vacuum. Zapkel had been right about one thing. The void was watching. Coombs could feel it. The pod's thrusters fired at the last second, slowing his descent just enough to avoid becoming another piece of wreckage. The impact still rattled his teeth as the pod clamped onto the derelict's hull, magnetic seals hissing. His HUD flared to life. Atmospheric readings, unstable. Structural integrity collapsing. He had minutes, maybe less. He didn't hesitate. The pod's hatch blew open, and Coombs plunged into the wreck. The inside was a tomb of shattered crystal and flickering bioluminescence. Zapirian architecture, once pristine and geometric, now lay in ruins, translucent panels spider-webbed with fractures. Hexagonal corridors collapsed into jagged mazes. The air was thick with the acrid tang of ionized plasma, and something else, something organic, coppery. Blood, his boots crunched over broken shards as he moved, his helmet lamps cutting through the gloom. The distress signal had come from deeper within. Then he saw them, a Zapirian female. Her carapace cracked, her luminescent veins dimming. She was curled around something, a child, its tiny limbs trembling, its large, glassy eyes reflecting Coombs' visor. The mother's mandibles twitched, a weak chitter escaping her as she tried to push the child toward him. The word needed no translation. Coombs didn't speak. He didn't have to. He knelt, his armored fingers gentle as he scooped the child into the crook of his arm. The mother's breathing was shallow, her body failing. He reached for his medkit, but she grasped his wrist with surprising strength, her claws scraping against his armor. Her eyes locked onto his alien, yet so painfully knowing. She was dying, and she was choosing this. The ship groaned around them, a deep shuddering tremble as the void's presence pressed closer. Coombs' comb crackled, Langford's voice, sharp with urgency. Coombs extract. Now, that thing is static. Then, silence. The child whimpered, its tiny claws digging into his suit. Coombs exhaled. Then he moved. He triggered his thrusters, launching himself back through the collapsing corridors. The child clutched tight against his chest. Behind him, the wreckage convulsed, crystalline walls buckling as something pulled, as if the void itself had taken a breath and inhaled. The pod was still there, its hatch open, its engines flaring. He barely made it inside before the ship behind him folded, reality itself warping as the darkness swallowed it whole. The pod jettisoned, engines screaming as it hurtled back toward the Indomitable. Inside, the Zapirian child trembled, its tiny body pressed against Coom's armor. He didn't know if it understood, didn't know if it could, but when he placed a gloved hand against its carapace, the child stilled, and for the first time since the distress call had echoed through the void, the silence was broken, not by fear, not by death, but by a single, fragile sound, a whisper of trust. The pod shuddered as it breached the Indomitable's hangar bay, its thrusters sputtering from the strain of escape. Coombs barely registered the impact, his body locked in place, the weight of the Zapirian child against his chest a silent anchor. Around him, the bay's emergency lights pulsed crimson, casting jagged reflections across the reinforced plating. Human engineers in hazard suits surged forward, their movements sharp with urgency, but their voices were muffled beneath the ringing in his ears. He didn't move. Not when the medics pried the child from his grip, not when they stripped his armor, revealing the burns beneath, the skin cracked and weeping where the alien ship's energy had seared through. His hands remained curled, as if still cradling something fragile. On the bridge of the Indomitable, Commander Langford watched the feed from the hangar in silence. The Zapirian child, smaller than Shed imagined, its carapace a delicate lattice of teal and silver, was being tended to by medics. It didn't struggle, didn't scream. It simply watched, its faceted eyes tracking every human that moved near it, its antennae twitching at the unfamiliar hum of the ship's engines. Behind her, the holographic display flickered with the last distorted images of the alien vessel's collapse. The void had swallowed it, folding space like paper before vanishing into an unnatural silence. "We're detecting residual energy signatures," one of her officers reported. "Same as before, it's not just debris. Something pulled that ship apart." Langford exhaled through her teeth, and the Zapirians, their fleets holding position, no hostile movements. But their scans are intense. She knew why. They had seen Coombs' rescue, seen a human soldier, one of the creatures they'd dismissed as reckless, violent, carry one of their own to safety. And now the galaxy was listening. In the Zapirian command vessel, High Commander Zapkel stood motionless before the sensor array, his carapace rigid. The data streamed across the crystalline interface, repeating the same impossible images, the human's armored form cutting through the disintegrating wreckage, the child clutched against his chest, the pod's desperate escape. Quilex, his scientist, hissed softly, his mandibles trembling. They should have died, the gravitational shear alone. They didn't. Zapkel's voice was hollow. For decades, the Zapirian Dominion had dismissed humanity as a species of chaos, unpredictable, emotional, dangerous. Their wars were brutal, their technology, though crude, was wielded with terrifying efficiency. But this was not the act of a predator. This was sacrifice, and it unsettled him more than any weapon. Coombs woke in the medbay to the sterile scent of antiseptics and the low thrum of the ship's engines. His body ached, his nerves alight with the ghost of energy burns. But his first thought wasn't of pain. It was of the child. He turned his head and froze there. Across the room, perched on a medical berth too large for its small frame, was the Zapirian. Its carapace gleamed under the artificial light, its limbs tucked close as it observed the human medics with quiet curiosity. One of them, a young nurse, hesitantly offered it a hydration pack, her movement slow, deliberate. The child reached out and took it. No fear, no aggression, just acceptance. Coombs' throat tightened. Somewhere beyond the Indomitable's hull, the Zapirian fleet lingered, their crystalline ships shimmering like ghosts in the dark. But for the first time since the distress call had echoed through the void, the silence between species had been broken. Not by war, not by destruction, but by a single fragile thread of trust. And the galaxy listened. Section Fe. The silence ends, the Indomitable hung suspended between two fleets, one of steel and fire, the other of shimmering crystal, each a reflection of the civilizations that birthed them. The human warship, scarred but unbroken, pulsed with subdued energy, its running lights a steady heartbeat in the void. Around it, the Zapirian armada drifted, their bioluminescent hulls casting eerie blue, green halos against the black. For the first time in history, neither side raised weapons. Inside the Indomitable's medbay, Captain Daniel Coombs watched the Zapirian child sip from the hydration pack, its delicate mandibles working cautiously around the unfamiliar texture. The nurse, Lieutenant Chen, had retreated a step, her hands open, her posture unthreatening. The child's large, faceted eyes tracked her movements, then flicked to Coombs. There was no fear in that gaze, only curiosity and something deeper, something that made Coombs' chest ache, recognition. The child saw him not as a predator, not as a conqueror, but as the one who had pulled it from the wreckage, the one who had carried it through fire and vacuum to safety. A soft chime echoed through the medbay. The doors hissed open, and Commander Helen Langford stepped inside, her presence commanding even in silence. She stopped a respectful distance from the child, her sharp eyes assessing. "Status," she murmured to Coombs. "Stable," he replied, voice rough. "No major injuries, just scared." Langford exhaled, her shoulders loosening by a fraction. Good. She didn't say more. She didn't need to. The weight of the moment pressed down on them all. The unspoken understanding that this fragile truce balanced on the edge of a blade. One wrong move, one misinterpreted gesture, and the galaxy would burn. Beyond the viewports, the Zapirian flagship pulsed with light, its crystalline spires glowing brighter. A signal Langford's, calm crackled. "Commander," came the tense voice of the bridge officer. "The Zapirians are hailing us." Direct channel. She didn't hesitate, put it through. The holodisplay flickered to life, and the alien commander, Zapkel, materialized before them. His carapace gleamed under the ambient light, his posture rigid, his mandibles twitching in a way that might have been agitation or anticipation. For a long moment, silence stretched between them. Then, "You saved them." His voice was layered, resonating with harmonics no human throat could replicate. But the meaning was unmistakable. Langford inclined her head. "We did." Zapkel's faceted eyes shifted to the child, then back. "Why?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. The Zapirians had expected annihilation. They had prepared for it, braced for it. But mercy? That was a variable their calculations had never considered. Langford didn't smile, but her voice softened just slightly. Because it was the right thing to do. A ripple passed through Zapkel's carapace, his crystalline plating shifting like disturbed water. Behind him, Kessix, the scientist, leaned forward, his antennae quivering with something akin to awe. "You risked your ship," Zapkel said slowly. "Your crew, for strangers." Coombs spoke before he could stop himself. "Yeah, we do that." The alien commander went utterly still. The first crack in the silence, a low, resonant hum emanated from the Zapirian flagship, a sound that vibrated through the Indomitable's hull like a distant choir. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't a threat. It was acknowledgement. Kessix stepped forward, his voice trembling. "We misjudged you." Langford's lips thinned. "Yeah, you did." But there was no venom in her words, only exhaustion, only the weight of centuries of fear, finally lifting. Outside, the Zapirian fleet began to shift, their formations loosening, their weapon arrays powering down. The tension in the Indomitable's corridors eased by degrees, the crew exchanging glances, disbelieving, hopeful. The child, oblivious to the enormity of the moment, chirped softly and reached for Coombs' hand. He let it take his finger, its grip surprisingly strong, and as the two fleets hung in the void, no longer enemies, not yet allies, the galaxy held its breath, for the silence had ended, and in its place, something new began. The silence between the fleets stretched, vast and fragile as spun glass. Zapkel stood motionless on the bridge of his flagship, his crystalline carapace reflecting the dimmed battle lights. The data streams still flickered across his vision. Damage reports, casualty counts, the last echoes of a war that had never truly begun. But his mind was elsewhere. He remembered the first time he had seen a human vessel, a derelict, drifting at the edge of Zapirian space, its hull pitted with micrometeorite scars. His scientists had dissected it, marveling at its crude alloys, its primitive reactor design. They had dismissed it as a relic of a species too reckless to survive. Now, he watched the Indomitable, its scarred flanks, its weapon ports still glowing faintly with residual heat, and understood how wrong they had been. Kessix approached, his bioluminescent nodes pulsing erratically. "The fleet awaits your command." Zapkel didn't answer immediately. His gaze lingered on the human warship, on the tiny life, sign flickering within it, the child nestled against the human soldier's armored chest. A child they had been ready to burn from the stars. A child the humans had shielded without hesitation. His mandibles tightened. "Recall all fighters, power down the primary weapons array." Kessix hesitated. "And if they wished us dead," Zapkel interrupted, his voice low, "we would already be dust." The truth of it settled over the bridge like a shroud. The humans had not fired first, had not even fired last. They had stood between the Zapirian armada and a single fragile life, and dared them to strike. And in that moment, Zapkel had seen something in their defiance that his people had long forgotten. Aboard the Indomitable, Commander Langford exhaled slowly, her fingers uncurling from the armrests of her chair. The tactical display showed the Zapirian fleet withdrawing, their formations dissolving into loose defensive patterns. No targeting locks, no energy spikes, just stillness. Coombs shifted beside her, the alien child still clinging to his gauntlet. Its large opalescent eyes blinked up at him, trusting in a way that made his chest ache. "They're standing down," Langford murmured. Coombs nodded. "Yeah." Neither of them celebrated. There were no cheers, no triumphant shouts, only the quiet understanding of soldiers who had stared into the abyss and found something unexpected staring back. Langford turned to the comms officer. "Open a channel." The Zapirian flagship responded instantly. Zapkel's image flickered onto the screen, his faceted eyes unreadable. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Langford inclined her head. Just once. Just enough. Zapkel mirrored the gesture. No words were needed. In the years that followed, historians would call it the Silent Accord, the moment two civilizations forged in fire and fear chose something else. The humans did not lay down their weapons. They did not disarm. They stood, as they always had, unyielding, relentless, a storm contained within steel. But now, when their ships crossed paths with Zapirian vessels, there were no challenges, no threats, only the slow, cautious unfurling of trust. And sometimes, when the void grew too vast, too cold, a shared frequency would crackle to life. A voice, hesitant but hopeful, speaking across the dark. "This is the Zapirian research vessel Luminous Dawn. We have a problem." And the humans would answer. Every time, as for the child, and on the anniversary of the day the silence broke, it would stand between two species, human and Zapirian, and remind them both, the galaxy was wide enough for monsters, but it was also wide enough for miracles.